The year started like any other. No sirens, no warnings, no urgent headlines demanding attention. People followed routines, went to work, paid rent, scrolled endlessly, and almost everyone missed the moment something essential stopped working. Because the foundation supporting modern money didn't fail in a dramatic collapse. It didn't crash. It didn't explode. It simply ran out. And the impact isn't waiting for the future. It's already flowing through the system quietly, steadily, relentlessly. This isn't theoretical. It isn't academic. It isn't something economists argue about on television. It's your income, your savings account, the cost of groceries, the price of fuel, the lifestyle you expect to still exist a year from now. For decades, people believed the dollar's strength was guaranteed. Because America was powerful. Because innovation never stopped. Because productivity would always grow. That belief became reality until it didn't. Because systems don't fail when everyone panics. They fail when belief fades. And right now, belief is eroding. Not suddenly, not emotionally, but precisely. The structure that allowed debt without limits, money without restraint, and consequences without accountability has reached its edge, and the people who truly understand money aren't surprised. They're repositioning. They've watched this cycle before. History has repeated it many times, and the ending never changes. Only the scale does. Only the speed does. Because once trust breaks, it doesn't recover. It collapses. And once you recognize the moment, there's no going back. For half a century, global power didn't rest on armies or flags or speeches. It rested on something far quieter. An agreement almost no one voted on. Almost no one debated. And almost no one was ever taught in school. Every day, every country on Earth needed energy. Oil wasn't optional. It was survival. And buried inside that need was a rule that shaped everything that followed. If you wanted oil, you needed one thing first. Not gold. Not goods. Not trust. Dollars. That single requirement rewired the global economy. Nations didn't just trade with the United States, they depended on its currency to function at all. Energy became the toll booth. Money became the gate. And whoever controlled the gate controlled the flow of the world. This wasn't market magic. It wasn't destiny. It was architecture. A system built quietly, maintained carefully, and protected aggressively, because once energy is priced in your currency, demand isn't optional, it's forced. That's how modern money really worked. Not through strength, through structure, and structure only holds as long as the rules do. Because this wasn't an accident, it was designed. For years, people were told the dollar was powerful because America earned it, because it worked harder, because it produced more, because it was disciplined. That explanation was comforting. It was also incomplete. The dollar wasn't strong because of what America made. It was strong because the world was required to use it. Imagine a stadium where every exit funnels through a single gate. It doesn't matter how modern the stadium is or how well the gate is built. Traffic flows there because there is no alternative. That is how the system actually worked. Not by excellence, innovation, or virtue, but by necessity. Demand did not emerge naturally. It was engineered, enforced, and protected. Countries did not hold dollars because they loved them or trusted them. They held them because they needed energy, global trade, and access to the financial system that controlled settlement, payments, and liquidity. Remove that requirement, and the foundation does not shake loudly. It thins quietly, slowly, almost invisibly. Thin systems do not fail with warning signs or gentle adjustments. They hold their shape right up until the moment they don't. When demand weakens, confidence follows. When confidence breaks, stability evaporates. Strength built on forced demand is not strength at all. It is dependency waiting to be exposed. And when that dependency is finally revealed, the collapse does not begin with panic or chaos, but with a quiet realization that the system everyone trusted was never as solid as it appeared for most people watching today. On August 15th, 1971, something irreversible happened. Most people didn't understand it at the time. Many still don't. But that night, money stopped being what it had always been. The United States went on television and told the world it was temporarily closing the gold window. Translation was simple. The dollar was no longer backed by anything real. No metal, no restraint. Just confidence. And confidence is fragile. Up until that moment, dollars were a claim on something tangible. After that moment, they were a promise. A promise that required belief to survive. Leaders knew this was a problem. Because if money is just paper, why accept it? Why hold it? Why trust it with the value of your labor, your trade, your future? You can't force belief forever. You have to replace it with something else. That single decision created an unsolvable equation. Unlimited printing on one side, finite trust on the other, and once those two drift apart, something has to give. Paper only works when belief does. The solution came quietly, not in public debate, not through democratic process, but behind closed doors, where systems are really built. A small group of decision makers understood the problem immediately. If gold was gone, something else had to anchor the dollar to the real world, something every nation needed, something no modern economy could function without. They chose energy. In the early 1970s, the world's most powerful government sat across the table from the world's most important oil producer and made a deal that would reshape history. It was simple, elegant, and dangerous. Oil would be sold in one currency only, dollars. In return, protection would be guaranteed, weapons would flow, security would be assured, stability would be enforced. It sounded like diplomacy. It functioned like leverage. Because oil isn't a luxury. It's oxygen for industrial civilization. If you wanted growth, transport, manufacturing, heat, food, you needed oil. And if oil required dollars, then dollars became unavoidable. The system was brilliant because it solved the trust problem without restoring discipline. It didn't fix the weakness, it hid it. This solution saved the system and doomed it. Once oil was priced in dollars, the chain reaction was automatic. Energy sat at the base of everything. Transportation, manufacturing, food, electricity. If a country wanted to function, it needed oil. And before it could buy oil, it had to buy dollars. That single requirement did something no empire had ever achieved before. It created permanent global demand for one nation's currency. Japan couldn't power its economy without dollars. Germany couldn't run its factories without dollars. China couldn't build cities without dollars. So they earned them, saved them, stockpiled them. Dollars flowed outward, and power flowed inward. The United States didn't need to dominate trade. It didn't need to outproduce the world. It just needed to sit at the center of the system and collect demand. Money could be printed. Deficits could expand. Debt could grow. Because the world needed those dollars more than America needed restraint. That's what made it feel unstoppable. But there was a condition buried deep inside the machine, one most people never questioned. As long as energy required dollars, the system held. The moment that link broke, everything downstream would feel it. Control the price of energy, and you control everything. For decades, this arrangement created something no country in history had ever enjoyed. Freedom from consequences. The United States could buy more than it sold, borrow more than it saved, consume more than it produced, and nothing broke. Not immediately. Because when deficits appeared, they were absorbed elsewhere. When money was printed, it didn't stay home. It spread outward into global reserves, foreign banks, and central treasuries. Inflation didn't disappear, it was exported. What looked like prosperity was actually privilege. Cheap goods flowed in, living standards rose, debt piled up quietly in the background, and the illusion took hold that this was normal, that this was earned, that this could last forever. But privilege has a way of disguising dependency. The system didn't make America independent. It made it reliant on constant foreign demand for its currency. As long as the world needed dollars, the imbalance didn't matter. The moment that need weakened, the weaknesses would surface all at once. What looked like strength can actually be dependency. Every system built on leverage has an expiration date. This one was no different. The deal that anchored global demand for the dollar was never meant to last forever. It wasn't written into law, it wasn't permanent, it survived only as long as it was useful to both sides. And then, quietly, it reached the end of its usefulness. No press conference announced it, no emergency meeting interrupted regular programming. There were no headlines explaining what it meant. But the rules changed. The agreement that once forced the world to price energy in dollars wasn't renewed, it didn't explode, it simply ended. And when systems like this end, they don't fail all at once, they begin to unravel. Most people didn't notice because nothing collapsed that day. Gas stations didn't close, ATMs didn't shut down, life went on. That's what makes it dangerous. Because the most destabilizing changes don't arrive as crises. They arrive as absences, a rule that no longer applies, a requirement that quietly disappears, and only later do the consequences catch up. The most dangerous changes are the quiet ones. At first, the shifts were subtle, easy to dismiss, easy to explain away. A trade settled in a different currency here. An energy contract priced outside the dollar there. A new alliance announced with polite language and vague promises. Nothing that looked like rebellion. Because this wasn't rebellion, it was preparation. Countries that rely on oil and trade don't move emotionally. They move strategically. And once the rules changed, they began adjusting their behavior the way rational actors always do. They reduced exposure, they diversified reserves, they built alternative payment channels. Not because they hated the dollar, because they no longer needed it the way they once did. Energy producers began accepting new terms. Importers stopped assuming dollars were mandatory. Central banks quietly rebalanced portfolios that had been dollar-heavy for decades. To the public, It looked like noise. To policymakers, it was invisible. To the people who understand systems, it was unmistakable. When participants stop behaving the same way, the system has already changed. Long before collapse becomes visible, preparation is already complete. Preparation always comes before collapse. The evidence didn't arrive as a headline. It arrived as numbers. Slow, boring, technical numbers that almost no one pays attention to until it's too late. For decades, the majority of global reserves sat in dollars. Central banks didn't debate it. They defaulted to it. Because when a currency is required for trade, holding it feels safe. But then the percentages began to slip, not crash. Slip. A few points here, a few points there. The kind of change politicians dismiss and markets ignore. But reserve currencies don't lose dominance overnight. They erode, quietly, relentlessly. And once erosion starts, it rarely reverses. What matters isn't the level, it's the direction. When central banks stop increasing exposure and start reducing it, the psychology has already shifted. Trust doesn't announce its departure. It leaves fingerprints. Every year, fewer dollars. Every quarter, more alternatives. Every adjustment, a little less confidence. And here's the dangerous part. Reserve systems look stable right up until they aren't. They hold, they hold, they hold, and then they break. Because confidence doesn't fade linearly, it snaps. Official statements always arrive last. By the time governments admit something is wrong, the people who actually move capital have already acted. Because money doesn't wait for permission. It responds to incentives, risk, and timing. And the first thing that changes in any failing system isn't policy. It's behavior. Quietly, the largest pools of capital on Earth begin to reposition. Not dramatically, not all at once, just enough to reduce exposure, just enough to create optionality, just enough to make sure they're not standing in the wrong place when confidence breaks. This is how you know a shift is real, when words stay calm but money starts moving. Land gets bought, hard assets get accumulated, foreign exposure increases, not because of ideology, not because of panic, but because the people closest to the system understand how fragile it actually is. They don't need headlines to tell them what's coming. They read the incentives. And while the public is reassured, the exits are quietly opening. Not for everyone, just for those who move early enough. Because when the fire becomes visible, the doors are already crowded. The exits fill before the fire is visible. Up until now, everything has sounded distant, abstract, global. But this is the point where it stops being about systems and starts being about you. When dollars circulate overseas, they're contained. They sit in reserves, bonds, and accounts that don't touch your daily life. Prices at home stay manageable because excess money stays abroad. But when demand falls, that balance breaks. Those dollars don't disappear. They come back. They come back through bond sales, through trade shifts, through reserve rebalancing, and when they return, they collide with the real economy. Too many dollars chasing the same amount of goods. Imports cost more, energy costs more, food costs more. Wages don't keep up, because wages never move as fast as prices do. This isn't theoretical, it's arithmetic. You feel it at the grocery store before you see it in a report. You notice it in rent, fuel, medicine, the things you can't opt out of, the things that define your quality of life. That's when people realize what reserve status actually meant. Not prestige, not power, cushion. And when that cushion deflates, the fall is sudden. This is where geopolitics becomes personal. Once the process starts, it doesn't rely on fear or opinion. It runs on mechanics. First, global demand weakens. Not all at once, just enough to matter. Fewer transactions require dollars, fewer reserves need to be held, the foundation thins. Second, large holders begin to sell. Central banks don't want to be last. Neither do institutions. Treasury bonds that were once safe start leaving balance sheets. Prices fall, yields rise. Third, rising yields turn into pressure. The government has to refinance old debt at higher rates. Interest payments swell. What used to be manageable becomes heavy. What was heavy becomes impossible. Fourth, the only remaining tool appears. Money gets created to cover obligations that can't be paid otherwise. Not because leaders want inflation, but because default is politically unthinkable. Fifth, inflation accelerates. Prices rise faster. Confidence erodes further. More holders exit, more dollars return home. The loop tightens. None of this requires panic. None of this requires conspiracy. It's cause and effect. Once the first domino falls, the rest don't hesitate. In the past, when one system weakened, another was ready to take its place. When silver faded, gold stepped in. When the Dutch lost dominance, Britain rose. When Britain fell, the dollar waited. There was continuity, a handoff, a sense that order would survive the transition. This time is different. There is no obvious successor, no currency the world universally trusts. The euro carries structural flaws of its own. Other currencies are tightly controlled, politically constrained, or regionally limited. Digital alternatives promise freedom, but lack stability. Gold holds value, but it doesn't move at the speed modern trade demands. So instead of a transition, we face a vacuum. And vacuums don't create balance. They create instability. When no single standard exists, exchange rates swing, trade slows, trust fragments. Countries demand payment on their own terms, supply chains shorten, costs rise, cooperation thins. Uncertainty becomes the system. And uncertainty is more dangerous than collapse because it spreads faster. Businesses freeze, investment hesitates, governments react late and clumsily. Chaos doesn't need a villain, just a vacuum. History doesn't warn, it records. And every time money loses its anchor, the pattern repeats with unsettling precision. Different empires, different technologies, same ending. Spain flooded the world with silver and believed abundance meant permanence. It didn't. Debt followed, confidence cracked, power faded. The Dutch mastered finance and trade and assumed sophistication made them immune. It didn't. Leverage caught up. Britain ruled an empire so vast it felt eternal, but wars, debt, and debasement hollowed the core. Within a generation, the pound went from global ruler to regional currency. None of these collapses happened because leaders were stupid. They happened because the system rewarded overextension until it couldn't anymore. That's the part people miss. Collapse doesn't begin with failure. It begins with success, with expansion, with confidence high enough to ignore limits. Every reserve currency follows the same arc. Growth, dominance, privilege, abuse, debasement, loss of trust. Blame doesn't matter, intent doesn't matter, morality doesn't matter, math does. Empires don't collapse differently just later. When confidence breaks, governments don't improvise. They follow a script as old as currency itself. The first instinct is control, not because leaders are evil, because control feels like stability when trust disappears. Capital movement gets restricted. Regulations tighten. Emergency powers expand quietly, then permanently. These measures are always framed as temporary, always justified as protection, and always introduced after the real damage is already done. By the time they appear, confidence has already begun leaking out of the system, and panic is no longer theoretical. Once people start questioning money, allowing free movement becomes dangerous to those in charge. If capital can escape freely, the system is forced to admit failure. And systems rarely admit failure willingly, especially when power, legitimacy, and survival are at stake. So access narrows, choices shrink, compliance replaces confidence, rules multiply, exceptions disappear, and enforcement replaces persuasion. The appearance of order becomes more important than restoring trust itself. This isn't speculation. It's pattern recognition drawn from history, from ancient empires to modern states. When belief fades, force steps in to preserve appearances, slow reactions, and contain consequences. And here's the critical point. These actions do not fix the underlying problem. They only delay the outcome. They slow the exit, trap participants, and buy time at the cost of freedom. Power always tightens when trust disappears. And once that tightening begins, it rarely reverses, because systems built on fear depend on pressure, surveillance, and compliance to hold together longer than expects in moments like this. When money fails, reality doesn't. Across every collapse, one lesson repeats itself with brutal clarity. Paper promises vanish first. What remains are things rooted in the physical world, the things people rely on when systems stop working. Land still grows food. Energy still powers life. Skills still create value. Communities still function. This isn't about predicting markets, timing crashes, or chasing returns. It's about understanding what survives when abstractions break down and confidence evaporates. History shows that systems built on leverage disappear quickly, often faster than anyone expects. Systems built on usefulness endure, because usefulness doesn't require belief. People who make it through these periods don't do so by guessing perfectly or reacting early to headlines. They survive by staying connected to things that exist outside spreadsheets, algorithms, and policy meetings. Productive assets, practical abilities, local networks, relationships that still matter when institutions don't. When trust in money erodes, trust shifts somewhere else, toward what can't be printed at will, toward what can't be frozen by decree, toward what doesn't depend on confidence to function. Food still feeds people, energy still moves machines, skills still solve problems. This isn't advice, it's observation. Because when paper systems fail, they always fail the same way. Confidence breaks, liquidity disappears, and promises collapse under their own weight. And when that happens, reality doesn't negotiate or wait. It reasserts itself, quietly at first, then all at once. And history shows this lesson again and again, without mercy or exceptions ever. Paper fails, reality doesn't. What comes next isn't a mystery. It never is. History doesn't hide its conclusions. It repeats them until people are forced to look. Every currency that gained dominance believed it was different, smarter, stronger, more advanced, and everyone eventually learned the same lesson. Privilege is not permanence. Confidence is not infinite. And systems built on belief don't survive when belief runs out. This moment feels ordinary because collapse rarely announces itself. It unfolds while people argue about everything else, while headlines distract, while life goes on just enough to delay recognition. The danger isn't that this will happen overnight. The danger is that it's already happening slowly enough for most people to ignore. Timing matters more than certainty. You don't need to know the exact date. You only need to recognize the direction. By the time outcomes are obvious, options are gone. That's the real divide. Not between rich and poor, not between left and right, but between those who understand early and those who wait for permission. You don't need to panic, but you do need to see, because knowing early is the only advantage history ever gives. If this changed how you see the system, stay with me. The answers aren't hidden in the future, they're written in the past, and that's where we'll keep looking.